Here are some thoughts that I wanted to share. I've been thinking about metal objects like these. In the Bible, they talk about turning sort of the instruments of war into beneficial tools, and I was wondering what, they might use weapons for in the future. And I think one of the things that they'll probably use for is railings, things to keep people safe from falling. There's a lot of opportunity to create interesting architecture, and it'd be a good use for metal. And I think that that's important. I think that it's important that people know that knowledge. That's the knowledge that the people in the Bible had. I believe that's what the Hebrews primarily did in Kemet, that they were the metalsmiths, and that's why they created the Ark of the Covenant, the different objects for worship. They were channeling all their war technology, Bronze Age war technology, to create objects of worship and to create peace, attracting people through the smell of animal sacrifices, because people were forces just like the force that created everything, and that way they could sort of divert our instincts and cause them to benefit the priests, and the priests would then, in theory, benefit the people, and a society would grow. Here we also have a lot of oak trees, and oak is a very strong wood, and that's also the same word for the that was taught to me by a Jewish person from Tel Aviv. And I'm not Jewish. I grew up Catholic, and the word Catholic is supposed to mean universal. Yet I didn't know these. I never was taught these at church. The meaning of words and universal concepts to try to unite different religions. In fact, I don't think I ever was introduced to anyone who would think of doing that until I was gifted a Quran that is a translation from the Ahmadiyya sect, which was the first mosque to be built in Berlin, belonged to this Pakistani sect of Islam, which is not recognized by other Muslims for many reasons. One, because they recognize another person after Jesus as Messiah, in addition to Jesus, which means anointed. Even like similar to how, there were many anointed people before Jesus. And I believe that that's a sort of an abstract term that was used by the priesthood to, give people that role. And with Jesus, some did and some didn't, and so that caused conflict. That's why not everyone recognizes him as having that role. Well, in this case, there was people in Pakistan who recognized someone as having that role, and he wanted to unite the world through Islam. And Islam also uses a variation of the word El, which is Allah. Linguists say that it's a portmanteau of the word Al-Ilah, or the force, Allah. And the Quran is an interesting document because it has talks about the sun, the moon, and Venus as being sort of considered ilahi, or gods, as we would call them today. These words have lost their meaning. They venerated these for their qualities. Yet the wisdom of Allah, or Elohim, or however you want to phrase it, is that it one, and so it encompasses all of the forces of this world. And it is one. It is the creator and it is the destroyer. And so there are different words to describe the different characteristics or nature of forces, whether they are working together or they're opposing. But the nature of it is working together, and that's using the tetragrammaton, like in the name Jehovah's Witnesses, and also traditionally said Adonai. So many things indicate that the word El means to or towards. However, some people translate it as the mighty one, and I think one of the reasons is because as the Hebrew people began to use the alphabet from Kemet and not the cuneiform script of their ancestors, they used the letter Aleph, and that letter is an animal with horns, symbolizing maturity, strength, and all these things. And so this worked very well for the words that they had inherited from their ancestors, and they imbued the word that they had for God with a secondary meaning, which was something that was strong. And this was also the word that was used for trees, Elon, like the name Elon Musk. This is the heritage of Jewish people. This is the heritage of Christian people, the heritage of Muslim people worldwide. However, the Jewish people, live closest to this heritage because their vocabulary and their language and in the ancient language and in the modern language that was reconstructed, similar to how they reconstruct Native American languages, we are now in the Americas. This forest is probably 80, 90 years old, and this land was sacred to the Native Americans that lived here. So there's a lot of parallels that can be made between people all around the world, and so this wisdom is universal wisdom. I just try to respect its origin. It is something that I was given by people who are different from me, friends who are different than me, strangers who are different than me. So, and I'm a privileged person who can talk about these things, has the time to think about these things and organize these things. And I have faith that it's important for me to share these things, because then it would be a waste if it was just hidden and so that no one could extract the wisdom out of it. And that wisdom, the best wisdom of it, to me, is just the wisdom of the nature of this force, which was described in the name Jehovah, or pronounced in many different ways. But that's the way one group pronounced it, and I like to honor that group by pronouncing it that way, even though I've pronounced it other ways. And it's not, I don't think that it should be anything that's said by any particular person, because it's so important that I think everyone should know it. And I consider Jesus the Messiah, and all of us are special. We all are qualified to be anointed, and people are anointed in the Catholic Church. Every time someone gets baptized, a lot of times they get anointed, and so it's just remembering, the truth that we're special, all of us. And the meaning of that name, as I understand it, Jehovah, is that it's all the forces, they're working together to create. If everything was opposing itself, then nothing would exist. It would just continually oppose, and just be one big, stellar nebula that never formed or coalesced into anything. Yet we have something, and we exist, and it's because the forces of nature work together. And in order to preserve that, in order to preserve our life, in order to preserve things, we also need to work together by loving and showing affection. But we also should know that this is also a very passionate force, as the scholars on the Torah.com article described it. It can, if there's an imbalance or an injustice in the world, it can be passionate against us in a negative way. And that's something that I was taught by a childhood friend, that he would tell me that they didn't believe in all of the Satan and all these things the way Christians do, and that really changed the way I viewed the world, because then I started to study the Torah, and I started to see that the original teachings were that God was one, and that the death and other things that we experience in life are opposition from this force. And that's why I think many people say that this life is a test. And that's why people pray, to not be opposed. They also fear God. They fear Allah, and they also, and Jesus taught, love God, and something like love your neighbor. And so there you see that love is part of that teaching. It was the name of the force, the deity, the thing that is creating everything, and its nature. And this continued also into the Quran, where it's also ascribed to Jesus. However, it changes because of a different context of the Prophet Muhammad's life, and it was establish prayer and give charity. And there's a very specific context for those two. They were establishing prayer to pray instead of just doing business. The Arab people were merchants, and they were the nomadic people that were traveling in and out of Jerusalem. They had different interacting with people who spoke different languages. So they had Aramaic words, they have Persian words, they have South Arabic words. They have the words from Kemet, from the Hebrew, the Israelites. And some people say that the word Hebrew and Arab are very similar. One means to cross over, and the other one means to go west and to travel around. That's the direction the Hebrews went. So it's all very similar, and they were establishing prayer to pray together, to turn life into a more spiritual thing instead of a transactional thing, which is sort of our base instinct. And then, they were also giving charity to other people. And the word zakat, I've been taught online, is that it means to purify. And so they were purifying their wealth through their through this act of giving. That way, I've heard, it is less likely to hurt. You're not going to use it to hurt yourself. And they were doing many other things to manage their wealth, like fasting. This is really important for people in this world now to understand, and it's very difficult. It's difficult for me. It's very difficult to fast. Some people shouldn't fast. It's obviously, tradition is, not dogma, it's wisdom. And so one has to study it and extract what one can and understand why it's written. And that knowledge is thanks to Muslim people who are very kind to me, and Muslim Arab people who are very kind to me, and they never really talked to me about religion, but just their kindness was enough to inspire me to look into it more and to try to find how it's all connected so that I could honor all the relationships. And that's one thing about Islam that is not always clear is that there's a lot of criticism of Jewish people, but I don't think that's well understood because back in the day it meant something completely different than it does now. It was the people who lived in Judah, the centralized religion of Judah, was another tribe. They were the same people, but they were another tribe. And they did, they had certain customs and they didn't follow the customs like they would. It's just like someone today in Europe, you have the Protestants and the Catholics. And so we can see that there's a lot of conflict in that history, probably more so than between people from Judah and Arabia. And probably one of the reasons why is because these concepts weren't very well translated, and war gets into it means confusion, and that's really what it does, is it causes confusion. And that's why we've lost so much knowledge. And one of the reasons why we've had wars, because people with power have spoken out against specific people, and they're bad words, that hurt people. So that's it. Peace. Good words. Life. That's Jewish wisdom.